everybody. Welcome back to Genes to Traits Part 2. Like in our previous section, we talked about how you get your genes, one from your mom, one from your dad, and all our genes are packaged up in the sperm and the egg. But today we're going to talk about the two types of genes that your parents can give you. So your parents can either give you a dominant gene or a recessive gene. Okay, now don't let these words scare you. Okay, they're pretty simple. Okay, dominant genes, okay, we're going to use capital letters to represent those genes. And we're going to use lowercase letters to represent recessive genes. So whenever you see a capital letter, we're always talking about a dominant gene. Whenever we see a lowercase letter, we're always going to be referring to those genes as recessive genes, okay? And this is very important, so keep that in mind, okay? Now, keep in mind that your parents can only give you one gene, okay, for each trait, okay? They obviously pass on lots of genes to you, but only one for each trait, okay? So, since that's the case, there are three possible gene combinations that you can have. So when your mom and your dad, okay, gave you your genes, they passed on either dominant or recessive genes, and they only gave you one for each trait. Now these gene combinations are also called genotypes. Okay, genotypes, very important, okay? So genotypes is just a fancy word that means gene combinations. So now let's imagine that one parent gave you a dominant gene and your other parent gave you a dominant gene. Now you have two genes that are the same. They're both dominant and they're both for the same trait. In this case, we would say that your genotype is homozygous dominant. Homo meaning the same, zygous meaning you got your genes when you're conceived, and these genes are dominant. Okay, therefore the capital letters. Now, what if one parent gave you a recessive gene and the other parent also gave you a recessive gene? Okay? Because remember, we get one gene from our one parent, we get the other gene from our other parent, right? So if you have two of the same genes, but they're both recessive genes, then we say that your genotype, your gene combination, is homozygous recessive for a trait. Now keep that in mind, that you can be homozygous recessive, for example, for hair color, but you could be homozygous dominant for eye color, okay? So just because you're homozygous recessive for one particular trait doesn't mean that you're homozygous recessive for all your other traits as well, okay? Now, the last gene combination is, well, if one parent gives you a dominant gene and your other parent gives you a recessive gene, now you have two different versions of a gene. You have a dominant gene and a recessive gene. In this case, we say that you're heterozygous for this particular trait. Okay? Now let's do an example. Okay? So let's pretend that we have two genes, one dominant gene and one recessive gene. The dominant gene, okay, is going to give you dark hair. So if you get this gene will produce protein that will give you dark hair. If you get the recessive version of that gene, this gene, okay, will now give you blonde hair, okay? So let's imagine that we have three people, Mario, John, and Jacob. Now, and let's imagine that Mario was homozygous dominant, John was homozygous recessive for hair color, And Jacob was heterozygous. Okay? Now, how would we write their genotypes? Well, remember, homozygous means that you have two dominant genes. So we would write his genotype with two capital letters, D's, because that's what was specified. If John is homozygous recessive, then John would we would write his genotype with two lowercase d's, right? Because he got one from his mom, one from his dad. Homozygous dominant, Mario, one from his mom, one from his dad, okay? And finally, let's say Jacob was heterozygous. Jacob would have two different versions of the same gene, okay? One dominant, one recessive. Therefore, the hetero, that's what hetero means, different, okay? So, now what would the phenotypes be? What are the phenotypes? Okay, what are their physical appearances? Okay, well, remember, Mario has two dominant genes, and the dominant gene will give you dark hair. So it's pretty easy to guess that Mario would have dark hair. Okay, that would be his phenotype. All right, his phenotype. Now, John is homozygous recessive, meaning he has two copies, both recessive. We look at our key, that would give us blonde hair. This gene would give us blonde hair. So therefore, we would say that John has blonde hair, okay, because of that genotype. Now, to the final one, okay, heterozygous. Okay, Jacob has a dominant gene, that's going to give him dark hair, and blonde hair, okay, gene, okay, the recessive version. So he has a dominant version and a recessive version, okay? Now, in these particular examples, okay, his phenotype will be dark hair. All right? So whenever you're doing these problems and you're trying to figure out what their phenotypes is, remember, the only time you will see a recessive phenotype is when you have two copies of the gene. If you have a dominant copy present, then that phenotype will be the one that is expressed, okay? So keep that in mind when you're doing problems, okay? Homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, heterozygous, those are genotypes. Phenotypes are the physical, think of P, physical appearances of these individuals because of the genes that they have, all right? Remember, genes determine your traits.